Okay, so we're continuing with Chagiga. We're in Dam Chav Gimel on the base. We're on the two dots, and we're continuing with the seventh case that was listed in the Mishnah on Chav Amid base. The Mishnah said, "Hakeli mistarv masher b'tocho lekodesh below the truma." So the Mishnah described the strict that existed by kodesh, karbanot, and the like, versus those strict or leniencies that you find by truma. And one of them was that the keli was mitzaref, that there are things in a keli, if there are things in a keli, like say there's multiple pieces of meat, and even though they are not touching each other, and one of them becomes tameh, right? The whole pot, everything that's in the keli becomes tameh, and that is a restriction that is found by kodesh and not by truma. So the Gemara's question is, where do we get this from? We're not pulling things out of our hat. So where is this known from? Rabbi Hanin. So Rabbi Hanin said the Amar Kira, because we have a pasuk that says Kafahat Asara Zahav Melea Ketoret. When the Nesiim were bringing their korbanot at the Chanukat Mishkan, it says that they brought Kaf Ahad, 1 spoon, Asara Zahav Melea Ketoret, filled with ketoret. Now, Hakatuv Asulo Lechol Mashivikav Ahad. Didn't have to say kaf ahad. Could have just said there was a spoon full of these things. Why say 1 spoonful of these things? To teach us everything that's in the spoon or inside a keli is considered one, and it's talking about ketoret. Ketoret is kodesh, and as such, you see over here that by kodesh, by korbanot, that everything inside the keli would be mitzaref and will become together. Metiv Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana had a question with this because the Gemara seems to make it that it is a doraita. There's a beferish pasuk that says that it's all considered one inside a keli. But we see in a brayta, my bad, a Mishnah in Edios, the Mishnah says as follows: Hosif Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is adding on to a statement that was mentioned right before. We're going to see that statement in a minute. Hosif Rabbi Akiva hasolit v'hakitorit v'halivona v'hagechalim she'im nagat tivul yom b'miktaso pasal et kulo. That if a tivul yom touched a part of these things, the solit, the flour, the ketoret, incense, the livona, the frankincense, and the coals, each one of these are used in the service in the avoda. That's all considered kodesh, flour offerings. Ketaris was the ketaris. The levona is used on top of the bread. It's used on top of certain karbanis, certain nachos, and gechalim is used to burn up stuff, burn up the ketaris, and as such, it is all in the realm of avoda. And said Rabbi Akiva, adding on to a previous statement that these things are also considered, if you touch part of it, it gets the whole thing if it's inside a keli. And this is, that previous statement was about the Rabbana, not a Daraisa. Miktani Resha. Mimai, how do I know it's a Rabbana? Miktani Resha. Hey, Rabbi Shimon ben Betera. Rabbi Shimon ben Betera gave testimony. That's what it's doing. Mesechus Idios. It's a Mesechus full of testimony. Hey, Rabbi Shimon ben Betera. Al Efer Chatot Shenaga Ha Tomei. The Miktosoi. Shetimeh et Kulo. The Ketani Hosif Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Shimon ben Betera brought down a rabbinic law. There is no pasuk in the Torah that talks about the afer being in a keli and becoming all tamei when one part of it is touched. And yet Rabbi Shimon ben Betera said, if it touches a little bit of the afer, the ashes of the parah aduma in the keli, the whole thing becomes tamei, and that is a rabbinic law. And then it says Rabbi Akiva added to that law, added to the rabbinic law. So how could you say that is a doraita law using that pasuk when clearly we have a statement that it is a rabbinic law? So Amar Reish Lakish Mishum Bar Kapara. The Reish Bar Kapara wants to say, no. There are two sets of laws. There is a doraita law, and that you learn from that pasuk that if it's in a legit keli, it's going to be all connected, and that is a doraita. And then Rabbi Kiva brought a rabbanan. Lo nitzucha el nisharei minha. Doraita tzich lekeli hakeli mitzarfo. Chance lekeli hakeli mitzarfo. But rabbanan gazru da'af agav de'eno tzich lekeli keli mitzarfo. So here is Rabbi Akiva added that the fine flour remainders of a mincha, though they do not require a vessel, are nonetheless combined by a vessel into one entity on the rabbinic level with regard to tumah of kodesh. So when do we say the oraita it's going to be considered everything tamei? That's when it needs to be in a keli, and it's in a keli, and it needs to be there. Therefore, one part gets everything becomes tamei. But let's say it's in a keli, but it doesn't need to be there. After the remainders of the mincha, maybe it doesn't need to be in a keli. It won't be mitzvah. So the Rekiva came and said no, and that's the rabbinic law that it needs to be that once it's in a keli, even if it doesn't need to be there, it will be mitzvah. Okay, tinach solit. That's very good for flour. What can you say for incense and frankincense, which do require a vessel? So where do you have a derabanan with this? Amar Nachum, Amar Rabba, Baravua, Kigon Shitzavron Al Gabe Kartavla, right? Where he piled them on top of a leather spread. The oraita yesh loy toich mitzarev, ein loy toich einu mitzarev. But Rabbanan v'tiknu the alpha gab the ein loy toich mitzarev. Oh, so really you need to put the ketardis in levina in a vessel that has an interior that has a depth to it, right? And if it doesn't have a depth into it, it's not mitzaref if it's on a flat slab, right? But the Rabbanan came and said, even if it's on a flat slab and it's not inside a pot, still it will be mitzaref. So you have, according to Rish Lakish, you have Rabbi Akiva who's saying there is a derabanan and there is a deoraita level of the keli is mitzaref. Keli mitzaref on the deoraita level, so if it's an actual keli, it needs to be there and it has a depth to it. And then one piece gets tamei, the rest of it gets tamei. And the rabbanon is when it's not, it doesn't belong in the keli, a flat surface, and yet it still is mitzaref. And then the Gemara says, this is according to Rabbi Chanin, and this is according to Rish Lakish. But pligi the Rabbi Chanin and Rabbi Chia bar Abba. But Rabbi Chanin is actually arguing with Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Yochanan, me'idatos Rabbi Akiva, nishne, mishnah. So this mission that we have, that talks about the Keli is mitzvah, don't think it's a separate mishnah, and it's based on it being a doraita. No, the whole thing is based on what Rabbi Akiva said, hoisif. Right, he added on. And the whole adding on was based on the rabbinic law, so there's never a doraita here, and therefore this keli mitzdarim is a the rabbanan according to Chia bar Abba. There is an interesting case that the Rambam brings down, the Rambam and the Raavad, what to do in such a case. So I'm going to open it up in a second, and then we'll go through the case. Okay. If there are two separate items in a keli, with a third item between them, and one of them was mitameh, one of them got tameh. If the object between them is one that requires a keli, the vessel combines them and everything is defiled. The Rambam saying it depends on the one that's in the middle. But if the outer object does not require a vessel, only the part that came into contact with the impurity is defiled, and if that piece is not mekabel tumah, then the rest of the things inside are okay. But the Ravad, on the other hand, the Ravad says, and saying that the third item does not constitute separation between the other two. Even if the item does not require a vessel, rather things that require a vessel are always combined by a vessel containing them. All the object does not need the vessel remains pure, although it's situated in the middle. So according to the Ravad, if the middle piece that doesn't require a keli becomes tummy, the whole thing still becomes tummy. Only in the other case around, when the piece that became tamei, everything inside is going to come tamei, except that piece that can never come tamei, and that doesn't need a keli, that will remain. Anyway, what to do in that case? All right, moving on. We're on 24A1. We're on the bottom right column as we continue in the eighth case from that Mishnah that we learned a while back. Okay. Harivi'i ba'kodesh pasuk. We know, and we already taught this in our introduction, we spoke about it multiple times, that there are different levels of tumah. And regular food can only become a second degree, right? So you have the avot tumah. Remember, avi avot tumah, that's the corpse. The ava tumah, someone will touch that corpse. The rishon, someone will touch that person. And then the sheni. And we said chulin food can only go up to a sheni, right? Chulin food cannot become a sheshi or a revi. But truma, there's more kodesh, can become a shlishi, and that's its end, and that's pasul, right? That's lashon of pasul. Where it uses lashon of tameh, that means you can make something else tameh. Pasul means it only becomes tameh and cannot make something else tameh. And a kodesh karbanot can become a revi. So the Gemara wants to know, where do we know this from? Tanya, and how do we know that by kodesh it stops at the fourth level? That there is a fourth level, it stops at the fourth level. How do we know this? Martin says v'dinhu, it is a kal v'chomer. Rashi points out this is not your most simple of kal v'chomers, because in the end of the day, kal v'chomer usually says, hey, the halacha is here like this, so the halacha will also be here like that. This one is not doing that. Rather, it's saying, since the halacha is here like this, the halacha over there should be different, based on the way this kal v'chomer is working. And Rashi explains, because there's a pasuk for the kal v'chomer that teaches the same halacha elsewhere, so therefore it could be learned a little bit different, the halacha in the other case. Regardless, let's take a look of what the kal v'chomer is. But they know it's a kal v'chomer that there is a revi'i by kodesh. Ma mechusar kippurim shemutar b'truma pasul b'kodesh. A person who was a mitzvah, for example, and he went to mikvah, and he's a tzvul yom, and then the night came, right? And now he can eat truma. The next morning he can still not eat karbanos until he brings the next morning. He brings the special karban. Then he brings that special karban. Then he goes into the mikvah again, according to the Ramban, and you see the end of the Mishnah. And then he can eat kodesh. So you can eat truma at the night after he went to the mikvah, even though he didn't bring his karbanos yet, and yet he can still not eat the karban. Shlishi. Now, when truma is a shlishi, truma shepasul b'truma, a shlishi shepasul b'truma, enudin sheyaseh revi lakodesh. So if truma becomes a shlishi and that's its pasul, cannot make a next truma revi, but doesn't it make sense that it should make a kodesh revi? Because here this guy can eat truma, but he can't eat kodesh, right? So that means that for shlishi level he's good, right? But he can't eat kodesh, right? So the kodesh is even stronger. That means if there is a tumah on the truma, even though it cannot make another truma tameh, it could make the kodesh tameh, if I understand this kal v'chomer correctly. And then she'aseh revi'i lekodesh v'lamadnu. Now, usually a kal v'chomer would tell us that same way truma has shlishi, that definitely kodesh has shlishi. So why don't I need? Why am I not learning the kal v'chomer that way? So v'lamadnu shlishi lekodesh min Torah, and I learned shlishi itself by kodesh from the Torah. I don't need the kal v'chomer. Therefore, the kal v'chomer is open for revi'i b'kal v'chomer, and now I can use this kal v'chomer to teach me that kodesh has a revi'i. Again, this is in a big Rashi, and I kind of try to incorporate that Rashi into the explanation of this Gemara. So now says the Gemara, shlishi the kodesh min Torah manai. You said you have a shlishi, and therefore you don't have to use the kal v'chomer for shlishi. That it exists by kodesh because you have a pasuk for it. Where do you have a pasuk for it? Min Torah manai, because it says va'abasar asher yiga b'chol tamei lo ye'achel. Basar that touches any tamei should not eat. And we know that milo eskina denaga b'sheni. And when it says b'chol tamei, it must mean b'sheni. How do you know it means b'sheni? Because there's another pasuk that talks about tamei, and it talks about a sheretz, which is a avatuma, who goes into the airspace of an earthenware keli. Once it hits the airspace of an earthenware keli, the whole keli and everything in it becomes tamei. How does it work? The sheretz is an avatuma. It goes into the airspace of the keli. The keli becomes a rishon, and everything inside the keli becomes a sheni. And the pasuk says that's considered tamei. So when it says over here, asher yiga b'chol tamei, it means touching the level of that inside of that keli cheres, that the stuff inside, which means it's a second. So you see that you have kodesh should not touch a second, meaning it should not become a shlishi. So you have from the Torah that a kodesh could become shlishi. The kal rachmana lo yachel. Revi mikal v'chomer. The revi is in the kal v'chomer hoda amoran that we said. That's the explanation of how do we know Revi? It's based on the pasuk that we have Shlishi, and based on the Kal V'chomer from Truma and the Mechusar Kippurim. Fine. Continues the Gemara, bringing the ninth case of the Mishnah. Uve Truma im nitme'et. Okay, so this case of the Mishnah. And it's actually appropriate to take a look at this Mishnah again, because this case is interesting. So if you go back to Chaf Amid Base 20B2, you have this case. Actually, it's 20B3. So it's case 9 here. Uve Truma im nitme'et ahaviyada. If one's hand it becomes tameh, its counterpart, its chaverta is tohar. But with regard to kodesh, matbil shtehen. He must immerse both of them. It's put both hands in a mikvah. For his hand make it counterpart tameh with regard to kodesh. Below betruma, but not with truma. Okay. So that's what the Mishnah said. Now, simply, the Mishnah means that if one hand becomes Tameh, the other hand is also Tameh for Kodesh. But Rav Shizbi is going to come and he's going to give a qualification for this. Rav Shizbi, the Chiburin Shanu. They taught this law when their hands are connected. The chiburin. Okay, ice and hands are connected. That's why Rashi learns. The other Rishonim learn differently. This case in the Rishonim are many different opinions here. And there's a lot of notes on the bottom of the article over here, and a lot of Mivorshim on this Gemara. And it can be learned in multiple different ways. We're going to try our best to stick to Rashi. And in the end of the day, even the Rambam's halacha, they point out that it's based on different Pirushim, different explanations of this Gemara. So if it's a little bit confusing, it's okay. Gemara is a little bit confusing here, but we'll do our best to try to work out the sugya to have some sort of clarity. Amar Rav Shizbi, b'chiburin shalom. We taught this when it was hands are connected. What does this mean, according to Rashi? That if the tamei hand, the hand that became tamei, touches the other hand, and that hand touches the food, the kodesh, that is what's awesome. That's when it becomes tamei. But if the second hand is not joined at the first time with the first hand, and it touches the kodesh, it does not become tamei. Eight by challenge of Shizbi. Why are you coming up with this whole explanation? The hands are connected. We have the Braita. Yad niguva. Mitameh cheverta. A dry hand makes the counterpart tameh. Letameh like kodesh. To make it tameh for kodesh, meaning that it makes it a shlishi. Of allowing the truma, but does not make it tameh for truma. Devrei Rebbe. These are the words of Rebbe. It's Yehuda Nasi. Devrei Rabbi. Rebbe Yossi or Yehuda Omer. Yehuda says, no, with salt, and it makes it a revi'i of a loy l'tamei, but it does not make it a shlishi. Now, what's going on over here? I amarta bishlama shiloi v'chiburin. If you say the strictness when they're not chibur, hainun rivusa dinguva. The dinguva, right? This is the novelty of the dry hand. Even mark b'chiburin ain't shloi b'chiburin loy. Okay, hold on. Let's take this one step at a time. Now, if you say that this case is not b'chiburin, that's what Yehuda Anasi is saying the chiddush that the hands are dry. What does it mean? Okay, the hands are dry. That means the hand is a sheni. Now, if a sheni touches something, it should make it a shlishi. If Yehuda's chiddush is that my one hand is a sheni, touches my second hand, it makes that also, it should make it a shlishi. No, but it makes it a sheni. Now that second hand touches the food, the kodesh, and it makes it a shlishi. That's why it's a tame. You can make it tame, and they can make it something else tame. That's why it's a shlishi, right? That's the novelty of saying that the hands are dry. But if you say that the hands are joined, but if the hands are not joined, it doesn't become tame. So what is Rehuta saying? That the hands were dry. Of course, there's no hidush here. And the hand is dry, and it's touching it. What's it called? It's touching the other hand. It can accidentally touch the food because both hands are involved in this manner, and therefore you're going to say it's a shlishi. The whole idea here that the hand is dry, meaning the hand is dry, should really make it a shlishi. We say if a hand is wet, we have a thing we already learned that wet stuff, mashkin, Chama made it always a rishon, right? Because there are certain mashkin that are considered a rishon. The spittle and the liquids of a zav and the zava, they're considered tamei. So therefore, if the hand was wet, even though it's really hands are sheni, we bump it up to a rishon. It would touch the second hand, it would be a sheni, and touch the thing and make it a shlishi, and there's no chiddush there. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's chiddush was it's a dry hand, sheni, and it should make the second hand a shlishi, but it doesn't. It makes it a sheni, and it touches the kodesh and it makes it a shlishi. So the whole idea is that when it's not touching, because if it's touching, then the other hand, Michiburin, could slip and touch it. Therefore, it's a shlishi. It has nothing to do with it being dry, nothing to do with it being sheni. It has to do with that hand itself might touch it, Michiburin. And that's the worry. So basically, this Abaya, a statement of Abaya, challenged the Rav Shizbi, and Rav Shizbi's opinion that it needs to be connected is kind of knocked out. Okay, so now Itmar Nami, it was also stated, Amar Reish Lakish, Lo Shanu Ela Yodai. They taught this only with his hand. Okay, Amal Yad Chavero Loi, but if his tamei hand touched a friend's hand, no, his friend's hand remains or doesn't become tamei. Yochanan says no. Whether he touched his own hand or whether he touched his friend's hand, but Otoyad, if it's with his own hand, with the first hand, it's going to be something that can make it tamei, right? And make something else something. Livsol of Eloi l'tamei, but if it's the other hand, and make it puzzle, but not tamei. Nimai. From where do we learn this? Piktari Seva. Because it says Shayad mitamei chaver talikosh avol truma. Pi tu lameli. Why is it repeated again? It says it twice. Hana tanya liresha. Elashmina latuye yad chavero. It comes to include the yad of the friend. Since it says it twice, touches your friend's hand, touches your friend's hand. You thought it was your own hand, your counterpart. No, it means actually your friend's hand. And Rish Lakish argued, but then Rish Lakish agreed. But Rish Lakish, Hadarbe. Rish Lakish also went back and said it. Amr Yonah, Amr Bami, Amr Rish Lakish. Echad yadim, echad yad chaveroi. Right? And echad yad chaveroi. The Otayad, the stringency applies only to a hand that was touched by a hand which was originally tamei. And that guy's hand, the second hand, or the second hand, or the friend's hand that he touched from the original hand, make something else tamei, make something else possible, not tamei. Vilifsol of a tamei tonight. Maybe the fact that it only makes it possible, not tamei, it's a machlokes to noim. It's not. This is a Mishnah in Yadayim. Anything that can make something else tamei for truma makes the hands a sheni. V'yad mitameh chaverta, and the one hand makes another hand tamei. Divrei Yeshua. It doesn't make it another hand sheni. Sheni hudlo. It must mean that doesn't make it a sheni. But shlishi of it makes it a shlishi. So here you have a machloket. So one opinion says if my hand is a sheni, the other hand is also a sheni, right? And Rabbi Yeshua says, and that's Rabbi Yeshua. Chachamim say no, one sheni cannot make another sheni. Meaning, the Gemara says it makes it a shlishi. The Gemara says no, timolay shani of it, v'lay shlishi. Maybe he cannot make it a sheni, and he cannot make it a shlishi. You don't have proof from that Mishnah that it makes it a shlishi. Eliki hatane. Rather, if you have anything, this is the machlokes Tanya. The Tanya, we're starting right there. Yad neguva mitame et chaverta. A dry hand makes the other hand tameh. Letame bekodesh. Of a low litruma. It can make kodesh tameh. According to Yehuda Nasi, this is the words of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, if my hand is a sheni, and I touch my other hand now touches kodesh, it makes it a shlishi, so it stays a sheni. That's Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. But Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Oto Yad, that applies only to that hand, right? But the second hand lives so of a loy lutamei. And the second hand can only make it possible, but not make it tamei. So there is a dispute. So whether one hand is a sheni, does it make my second hand a sheni? Now when I touch, make it a shlishi through that nasi. And the other opinion is Rabbi Yossi, who the son of Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Yossi, who says what? He says, no, if my hand is a sheni, makes my other hand the shlishi, and when it touches now by kodesh, it makes it a revi, and it's also lifsol of a loy le-tamei. Okay? Halacha l'maaseh went through this whole sugya. So let's see what the Rambam brings down. Says the Rambam, if one whose hand was impure by rabbinic law touches his other hand or that of another person, it confers third-degree impurity on the other hand. You should therefore not touch karbanos with that second hand, because it's going to make it a revi'i. In the opinion, according to the opinion of Yochanan and Reish Lakish, who said lifsol makes it possible, it doesn't make it tamei. So that's the halacha ma'isa. We have two more cases for today. All right, the next case, the 10th case in the Mishnah. Ochalim neguvin beyadayin mosa'avot. We may eat dry foods with contaminated hands in the case of truma, not in the case of kodesh. What is it talking about? So we know that in order for food to be able to be kabel tuma, to get tuma on it, it has to be something that got wet first. If it didn't get wet, then it cannot make something tameh. It cannot accept tuma. So it's saying you can eat truma that's dry, but you cannot eat kodesh that's dry. They never got wet. What's the chiddush here? Tanya. Sorry, right. Armechanina ben Antigonus. V'chiyesh neguva l'kodesh, v'lochiba hakodesh mechshartan. Kodesh never needs to get wet. The fact that they're so holy allows it to get tuma even without getting wet. So then, what are you saying here? I can eat it with dry food. I cannot eat dry, because even if it's dry, it's already considered ready to accept tuma, and then my tuma hands cannot touch it. So like tzrichin gegoin, shitachav lachaverto l'techpid, or shitachavu la'atzmoy l'chush u'charkar. It's a case where the guy never touched it with his hand. His hands are sheni. You're dying. Stam sheni, right? So he didn't touch the kodesh. You're allowed to touch the kodesh, right? Can't. Kodesh doesn't need to be wet. It's already able to accept tuma. So if your hands are sheni, you can't touch it. And he doesn't touch it. Someone puts it inside his mouth. All right. Or he uses an instrument that's not mikabel tuma, and he puts the food inside his mouth via the instrument that doesn't mikabel tuma. And now, now he wants to eat radishes or onion that are chulin, right? And chulin is not really a problem to touch with your hands if they're a sheni, because chulin cannot become a shlishi. But what can happen? Maybe when you put it inside his mouth, it touches the kodesh food. Now it'll make it a shlishi, right? So the kodesh gazer hu b'rabbanan. The rabbanan were gazer and said, you cannot do this. You cannot feed yourself. You cannot feed yourself, or someone feed you with kodesh in your mouth and eat yourself chulin at the same time, because maybe you'll touch your hands with your hands that are tamei, then maybe you'll touch the kodesh and make it tamei. With truma lo gazer rabbanan. When it came to truma, the chachamim were not gazer this. And finally, last case for today. It brings us to the next Mishnah. The the onen, the person who lost a close relative, but he never was contaminated to the dead body. He just lost that relative for that day. He cannot do mitzvot. He's not tamei, but still he cannot do mitzvot. And we said he cannot eat kodesh until he goes to the mikvah. And mechusik kippurim, someone who already went to the mikvah after being in the Torah or the like, and he's able to eat truma at night. Yet he can't eat kodesh until he brings a korban the next morning, and he goes back to the mikvah again. Then he can eat kodesh. So and by truma, no, truma he can eat, but not kodesh. My time. What is the reason why we put this into them that they have to go to mikvah? These onen and mechusik kippurim. Kivon, even though they're not really tummy. Kivon, the eda ida hevu aside. Since until now they were not allowed to eat it was also for them to eat the kodesh. Now that it's permissible for them to eat kodesh, to differentiate that state, we have them go to the mikvah, make them go to Tevilah. Okay, so here we are, oh Hashem, we are on Chaf Dalet Amid Bet and 24B3 at the Mishnah. We will pick up on this Mishnah the next time.
Thank you.